I am just in complete awe when I hear stories of women who have competed on a collegiate level in a sport while being a mom, finishing school. It absolutely blows my mind. I can't imagine what they've walked through.
Being a student mom in and of itself is difficult enough, let alone being a student athlete, student mom.
The most blaring message I have received from all of these interviews is they didn't have a whole lot of support. They had to figure out where they were going to get that support from.
I didn't think there was a world in which I could continue my education, be in a sorority, and have my baby. Like we saw from that study, 10 to 15% of student athletes are experiencing this annually. So it's not an insignificant portion.
That statistics comes from those who are reporting it. So think about all of the athletes who silently step away from their team because they are too scared to have these conversations and they don't know what support is out there.
They're protected under Title IX. They are able to maintain their eligibility, and they can still, again, have both their education and their baby.
A lot of these students are terrified to lose their scholarship, and they may choose to terminate their pregnancy because this is how they envision they would get through college, and they don't understand that there's this whole office that exists to make sure that they are not discriminated against. So we talk a lot about supporting student moms on this podcast, but today we're narrowing in on a group that faces a unique set of challenges: student athletes. Being a student athlete in college comes with pressure, but an unplanned pregnancy while being a collegiate athlete can make everything feel like it's at risk. Even with university protections in place, many women don't know their rights or don't feel supported enough to walk them out. Today, we're unpacking that reality and opening up the controversial topic of what needs to change. To stay in the know about our guests and to get sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, be sure to follow Unplanned and Untold on Facebook and Instagram. You can find those links and a way to support this completely donor-funded podcast by clicking the links in this episode's show notes. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of Behind the Blue Lines. Well, a theme we've recently seen a lot of on this podcast is pregnant and parenting college athletes. And we thought, what a better Behind the Blue Lines episode than discussing what this actually looked like. So I would love to welcome the one and only fellow student mom of mine, Charlton Jones, to the podcast today.
Hello, happy to be here, Kaitlyn.
It's been a while since we've been on.
And you know, Kaitlyn, I was just thinking that this is the collaboration that absolutely no one asked for, but everybody's going to get. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic. I feel like it's going to be good.
I think so too. I mean, I am truly mind blown by the amount of student athletes that we have found not only out there living their lives, but sharing their stories on social media, because that's how we found, I want to say, almost all of them.
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy to me because when you think student athlete, you think someone who's incredibly dedicated to their sport, someone who has immense discipline, and you certainly don't think unplanned pregnancy right alongside that. And so to hear these stories, these incredible student moms who have been through this experience, which again, I mean, we know the majority of unplanned pregnancies happen to college-age students, right, but it's just wild to kind of have those two populations coincide.
And a common thread, I would say, throughout every episode interviewing a student athlete is them fearing that they couldn't do it. That, I mean, we're talking about more than having your education and your baby. We're talking about having your education, also playing on a sports team, and somehow continuing to be a mother. And that is a huge load for these students.
And honestly, I don't know how they're juggling it all. And it's not like it's happening to a small portion of these students. Because when we were thinking about talking about this topic, one of the things that I did was start to kind of look it up. Because it is just so incredibly not one of those things you hear about. It doesn't seem like it's common. And yet the NCAA has done a study on this. And in their handbook, they indicated based on this study that 10 to 15% of college student athletes and their partners are affected by an unplanned pregnancy each year.
Wow. I mean, that's a good chunk of student
That is a good
athletes
chunk.
who are finding out that
And
they're
again, we're
pregnant.
not hearing about it.
Where are these stories? We need more of these stories because honestly, as you know, and I know, finishing college after having a baby and during pregnancy, that was hard enough. I am just in complete awe when I hear stories of women who have competed on a collegiate level in a sport while being a mom, finishing school. It absolutely blows my mind. I can't imagine what they've walked through.
And I can't imagine the identity shift that they have within that as well, because I can only imagine. I mean, let's just take a second here. Your girl is not athletic by any means. So, first off, the fact that we're having this conversation, this is already stretching the boundaries of my athleticism. All right. But outside of that, I would have to imagine that as a student athlete, you can become so encapsulated in your identity and
Absolutely.
focused on this is exactly who I am. I am this type of athlete. I am this type of person. I do this sport. And I would imagine it would become your whole world. And you throw an unplanned pregnancy into the mix of that. Now we're talking about a complete world shift, a complete perspective shift, a complete identity shift.
Absolutely. I mean, going the route of playing a sport in college, I almost did. Not many people know
Okay.
this. Not many people know
Okay.
this. But I was offered a D1 scholarship to play volleyball, and I turned it down because honestly, I was a bit burnt out and I wanted to YOLO my life in college because a lot of the behind the scenes work that goes into playing at the collegiate level, especially a D1, D2 level, you are talking about unimaginable amount of time spending doing practice at practices, right? Looking at videos of other games, watching everyone else's reels on their highlight reels. Who are we playing against? Where are their strong points? Where are their weak points? Then you've got strength and conditioning. That's a whole nother aspect of sports in college that people don't talk about. So you've got weight room. I don't even understand how on top of watching film, weight room, regular practice, and then team bonding, somehow these students have to fit in academics, studying for classes, going to away games, the travel that's included in all of that, and then add on an extra layer of being a mother. I just, in my wildest dreams, I applaud these women for not backing down to a challenge, because if there ever was a huge challenge, this is one of the largest ones I could imagine somebody facing in college.
Well, and I want to elaborate on what you just said, because I think it's so right. It is a whole other layer. All of these things that a student mom is already doing when you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, and then you add the aspect of student athlete, this is a whole uncharted territory that I mean, I can't even begin to imagine that they're trying to balance. And when you take on that other layer of student athlete and mix it with that student mom, identity that we were talking about, there's so much that goes into the mix of their day to day that you were just talking about that, oh my gosh, like, congratulations, you did it. Like, how are you guys doing that? Being a student mom in and of itself is difficult enough, let alone being a student athlete, student mom.
And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of this podcast, because we're just knocking down door after door. Like, if there is something that we need to address and talk about and take the stigma off, it is unplanned pregnancies. But then the second door to that is unplanned pregnancies amongst our collegiate athletes. And what do these support systems look like? Because that is probably the most blaring message I have received from all of these interviews is they didn't have a whole lot of support. They had to figure out where they were going to get that support from. Not all athletic departments have clear communicated policies. It's not like when these students join the team, that's something that's talked about, which honestly, let's be real, it should be talked about. It shouldn't be something that these women are left wondering, if I get pregnant, what happens? Because all that does is lead to fear and even more lack of of communication. I mean, we had a student mom that was on the rodeo team find out she was pregnant. She had no idea what the school's policies were. So for her, she just silently left that team, and because she was scared of what the repercussions were going to be and what if there wasn't any support. And I feel like we could do a better job at the college level of making sure there is clear and open communication within the athletic departments when it comes to unplanned pregnancies with athletes.
Absolutely. And I completely relate to that student mom because I did the same thing in terms of my sorority. I didn't think there was a world in which I could continue my education, be in a sorority, and have my baby. And so I said, hey, if I've got to pull out of something, I need to get my degree and I want to have my baby, like all of this other stuff, it's got to go by the wayside. And I think that goes to what you were speaking about as far as there's just a lack of information for students in terms of if this happens to you, here's what you can do. Like you can continue your education, you can have your degree, you can have your baby. But most people just don't know that. They think they have to either drop out, they think they have to terminate their pregnancy, they think they have no other options than to just try to figure it out and struggle along the way. And it also is just really kind of mind-boggling to me, like you said, that these departments, they're not communicating this clearly because like we saw from that study, 10 to 15% of student athletes are experiencing this annually. Exactly. So it's not an insignificant portion.
It's there. And that statistics comes from those who are reporting it. So think about all of the athletes who drop off, who, just silently step away from their team because they are too scared to have these conversations and they don't know what support is out there. I feel like a lot of this can actually lead back to an old school type of mindset. And if we don't
Absolutely.
talk about it, it's not happening. But if we talk about it, then it's going to give women permission to have these unplanned pregnancies because then they're going to realize all of the benefits that come with that. And I just need to clear the air on that kind of mindset because let me tell you what, there is not a single college student out there whose goal is to have an unplanned pregnancy in college at all. So I believe that old school mentality of if we don't talk about it, then maybe it won't happen. That's really got to go by the wayside.
I completely agree. And I think it kind of goes to, alongside that, the people that aren't reporting it. Within another study that we found in regards to college athletes and, reporting pregnancies, we saw that 4% of student athletes that were female had been pregnant, but 57% of that population reported that they had terminated that pregnancy. Wow. And I can't help but wonder if that kind of goes alongside that stigma of I can't sit here and be a student athlete and compete at the same level, even though, let's be real, they're protected under Title IX. They are able to maintain their eligibility and they can still, again, have both their education and their baby. Not to mention, the age-old information of just exercise is good for you when you're pregnant. It helps your baby. So why are we feeling like we can't mix these two?
And some of it might also come from doubt that they can do it all, because I feel like all of us to some degree have to face that, look in the mirror and ask ourselves, can I actually do this all? But truly, if you are already a college athlete, girl, you have mastered a lot of skills in life, like discipline, grit, time management. Like you've already proven to yourself that you can live a very structured life. And so essentially adding a baby into the mix, it's not much different. Those same skills, those traits are transferable. And a lot of these student athletes figure out in real time, oh my gosh, my life is structured. Adding a baby to it, I am used to structure. I'm used to grinding. I'm used to making sure, time management skills are in place because I was having to balance practices and academics. So now, yes, you're adding one more ball into the juggling act, but you can do it. You've already shown that you can live a pretty structured lifestyle already.
And let's talk about the aspect too of people incorporate their babies into their day-to-day life all the time. Being a student athlete who has a baby, I can only imagine that would be the most fun childhood. Like growing up, you've got a set in family that you can go to, that you're around 24/7.
Exactly.
I mean, what better village to have at your fingertips ready to help you?
And you don't know until you have these conversations. That is another common thread of just the fear and the doubt and wondering, can I do this? You're not going to have to do it alone. There's not a single student mom that we've interviewed that was also a collegiate athlete who didn't have a coach step up or a team step up and say, we're going to find a way to make this happen. We're going to make sure to bridge a gap here and to help you. And those photos from some of those interviews of the babies.
Oh my gosh. They melt my heart. Oh, there was someone, I can't remember who she was, but like you were saying, on the court.
Yes.
With what was it, a basketball and the baby? Oh my gosh.
Goodness.
And I see it and I'm like, you go, because the way that I just feel like, again, being a student mom, like I couldn't have imagined that whole other layer of things. And so to see someone do that, that's an incredible person right there.
Now, one controversial topic, because we love getting into controversial topics.
Let's bring in the tea. Let's do it.
Oh, man. I was scrolling on TikTok one day and I saw an article that was released about an Ole Miss coach and his thoughts on players having babies midseason. So we're flipping the script. We're talking about football.
Okay.
We're talking about men, having babies midseason with their significant other.
Okay.
And some of the quotes that this coach said were actually mind-boggling to me. I don't know if you've read the article, but for our listeners,
I have not.
It honestly absolutely blew my mind. And he's quoted a few times. I feel like he started digging a hole and then he kind of kept on digging. But here's a quote from him. We have to educate significant others who may have been pregnant during this season or were going to have a baby during the season. And you'd have to educate them on, you have this baby in the middle of the season, that father has to play good football. Hold on. It doesn't even stop there because even then I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, let's pause there for a second.
We're talking about the dad.
Yeah, let's pause there for a second because I do think there are things to unpack here in just that statement alone. And I'd be curious to know how this sits with the listeners because I feel like I can see both sides. And if I get hate for this, I apologize. But here's my initial thought is on the one hand, you've got a student athlete who with NIL introduction and everything like that going on now, this is quite literally his job.
Absolutely.
Is to play. Exactly. Like that is his job to play good football. And they have all of the resources at the university to help them do so, whether it's proper nutrition, it's, care for their bodies, it's like the training, it's all of the things. So on the one hand, I do get that. However, every single person in every single job has a family, no matter what that looks like. Right. And so I think it's so hard to kind of ask someone to pull themselves away and separate that family aspect, especially when you're in college and you're in all of those other layers that we've talked about, being a student athlete, being a student parent. That one's a toss-up for me.
Absolutely. I understand wholeheartedly he's there to play football. He's there to bring money in. but leading with possibly the family dynamic versus singling out that, in this case, just that sentence, the priority lands on the father and the father's athletic abilities. But what about that student mom? What about her academic goals in life? What about her
Yeah.
possible scholarship?
Well, and that's what I was about to ask. That's what I was about to ask you actually is what does that mean for the mother of his child? And let's say she is a student,
Mhm.
what does that look? Is she basically acting like a single parent as a student mom if she's not a student? Like maybe there's some additional time and resources there. Maybe they have a village, maybe it looks different, but yeah, what about her?
Well, he doesn't stop there. I wish he had, honestly, because even like you said, in
Okay.
that sentence, you could probably go both ways. You could see he's just trying to spotlight the importance of, listen,
Okay.
you got to show up and you got to play football. That's what you're here to do. Totally understand that. But he goes on to say,
So the tea is lukewarm at this point, and it sounds like it's going to start boiling
for
soon.
sure. He goes on to say, and he's speaking about the student athlete at this point, he has to be ready to perform and go out there and play. And when I say that is, you need to let him sleep. He needs to be in the other room detached. You have to explain to the mother, hey, listen, he ain't waking up for midnight feedings. Oof.
Okay.
Oof.
And I mean, again, I think I see both sides in the sense of like I do get where he's coming from with that statement. I get it. But being that student mom perspective coming to the forefront, I almost want to like if he was saying this to me, my follow-up would be, okay, is that every day or is that just the night before game day? Like what are we talking about here? What's the realistic expectation? Because again, if you're asking me to play single parent to this for an entire football season, that's a completely different conversation than, hey, we need to make sure he's rested and ready and prepared before a game.
But even then, so let's just say there's a game day and she has something, going on in her life, whether she's in school or she has a career or whatnot. It's very interesting. And again, I expect it from nobody less than a coach. The coach is trying to protect his players. He's trying to get them to
Absolutely.
play at their best ability. But what you do there is you almost separate the ideology that this is a unit, right? That it took two people to make this baby and it's going to take two people to take care of this baby. And it's a partnership. When you start using words like, let him sleep. He needs to be detached. Don't wake him up. Listen, coach, it takes two to tango. It takes two to tango. And your player made decisions that put him in a situation that he's going to have to actively walk through. And just reading that, you know me, I'm like, let's rock and roll. Let's really get to the bottom of things. This one really was disheartening to me because it
Yeah.
almost made it sound like these football players need to be held on a high pedestal. And these moms, you just need to fill in the gaps. You need to do whatever you need to do so that this guy can play a good football game.
Well, and I can't help but wonder what kind of precedent that sets for that family outside of football season or in years to come when there's no football that we're talking about. And, he's now used to, hey, within this particular time frame, like I need this particular care from you as, a partner, as the father of your child. And so you need to let me step back. Like it does that continue when there is no football in
Right.
question now?
Right. Because where's the line drawn? Is it the entire season? I mean, that's a long time for a woman to be taking care of a newborn baby
Absolutely.
essentially by herself so that the father can play a successful season.
Yeah.
Whereas, why does that fall on just the student mom, especially when she's in school? I just, regardless, I think this coach definitely brought to the surface good or bad. I mean, press is good or bad. It doesn't matter. It's still, I'll give him credit for being one of the first coaches to bring to the surface the topic of student athletes and what this looks like at a collegiate level, because it is happening at every university. And just like the student moms are not talked about, a huge portion of this is student fathers not being talked about at all.
Well, and to your point, like you said, regardless of how you feel about his statements, again, he is having that conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we certainly need to be willing to do when it comes to the topic of unplanned pregnancies. You know, that's the whole nature of why this podcast exists, is to end the stigma, to have the conversations that they are difficult conversations, to go through and analyze, you know, the different instances of, well, what happened next and how did that affect you, and why do you think that impacted you in that way, and, you know, what would you change, what would you have said to that student mom years ago. And I think that this is a whole other area that has really been untouched. And so agree, disagree with his statements, wherever you fall, he is opening the door for that conversation. And I would love to dive more into what he actually really thinks about that, and just kind of learn a little bit more and maybe see, what does that look like? Like, how have you had to apply that to your own student athletes?
Absolutely. I really hope that him, like you said, opening the door to this conversation will go further, because I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity surrounding the tabooness of student athletes.
I mean, come on, Kaitlyn.
Male student athletes, male football players of these big time schools that are raking in large amounts of money because of their student athletes. But there's a whole nother side of what's going on in their lives. I mean, I hope, come on, we need someone to pick up a TV series about this, because I would be tuned
truly. Netflix, take the idea. I'll take a small percentage for the you know.
It's literally happening. And so thank you, Coach, for giving a very, very small glimpse into a topic that we are trying to bust the doors wide open on. And it's unplanned pregnancies in college, specifically for this episode, collegiate athletes. And another topic I want to go back and touch on, you had mentioned Title IX. So if you're listening to this episode, whether you're pregnant, not pregnant, you have a friend who finds out she's pregnant and maybe she's a student athlete, we'd love to educate you on everything that is in place to protect student athletes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people generally don't understand when it comes to facing an unplanned pregnancy in college is, as a pregnant college student, whether you're a student athlete or not, you are protected. Like, just because you're facing an unplanned pregnancy does not mean that you can't continue your education, and it does not mean that the school can't do things to help you. Correct. Because they can. As a student athlete, you are actually, you know, really protected in that regard, because it's considered a personal medical condition. And so even if you're a female pregnant student athlete, you're able to maintain eligibility and have like up to 2 semesters of eligibility, so that you're not, you know, just being pulled out of the swing of things.
Exactly. And the Title IX office is going to be the place to go, because that is where you will learn the most about what your specific college will offer you based off of finding out you have an unplanned pregnancy, because they can't discriminate against student athletes due to pregnancy. And there's a list depending on your university, whether it's medical leave after having the baby, the ability to return back to your sport once you're ready and healed, and then continued access to academic support, not losing your scholarship. That's another hot topic. A lot of these students are terrified to lose their scholarship, and they may choose to terminate their pregnancy because this is how they envision they would get through college, and they don't understand that there's this whole office that exists to make sure that they are not discriminated against.
And again, I think you can add in that aspect of NIL there. Exactly. You know, that's still a relatively recent development. We haven't seen the full impact of how NIL is affecting these student athletes and their decisions. And so I think there could definitely be some fear there of losing NIL money and what that might look like and providing for their family and things like that. But I can only imagine that there, or at least I would wonder if there's some protection there as well.
Exactly. And honestly, this podcast was born out of the idea of us wanting to change the narrative, talk about the stigma, have open conversations so that people could see where there's not a baby steps. And I know we go back and forth about talking about the nonprofit baby steps and what we do
because we love it. Yeah.
We love it. That's what this podcast is from. You'd have to go back and listen to old episodes, but this podcast was birthed from that nonprofit baby steps. And we're trying so very hard to empower student moms on college campuses across the nation to have their education in their baby. And it's a beautiful nonprofit because any of those roadblocks that are in the way, whether it be housing, whether it be support, tutoring, we take those roadblocks out of the equation so these student moms can walk across that graduation stage being the best student and mother they possibly could imagine to be. And so our job is to change the narrative. And that's what I hope this episode will do, is to speak into further detail about student athletes and change what it's like to find out you are unexpectedly pregnant mid-season.
Yeah. And I mean, I would love to hear, we've heard from some of the student athletes who have had their own unplanned pregnancy. I would love to hear from one of the guys. What was that like for you? And, what did your coaches say? How did it impact you? What, were your nights like? Did you have a coach who maybe said, hey, you've got to be game ready? Let's have those conversations too, because again, we've got 10 to 15% of student athletes who are experiencing an unplanned pregnancy, a pregnancy every year. And so it's happening. There's definitely a conversation that we can have there in terms of what that looks like, what the narrative is, and how it could be adjusted.
I love that. So if by any chance you know of a student athlete facing an unplanned pregnancy,
send them our way.
Male or female, send them our way. We really would love an inside glimpse, especially with the males. I mean, it's hard to get some of these males on the podcast to share their experience. They're not all warm, fuzzy, gushy feeling type men, but it is a perspective that has never had the platform to be heard before. And that is what we want to provide for them.
Well, and I think too, there is that aspect, and I do think Connor touched on this a little bit whenever he came on the podcast, of you kind of have these fathers who sometimes they get afraid. Yeah. And so maybe they run away from their responsibility, but you do have the fathers who stand in the gap. Exactly. And who say, I'm going to be here and I'm, we did this together. And so those are also student athletes. Yes. There's a portion of the population who are student athletes who are doing that. And so regardless of which side you're on, again, there's a conversation that we can have here. And I think no matter if you ran away from that, no matter if you stood in the gap and stood beside your partner at that time, I think there's something that can be learned from that conversation, and just being open and vocal about it and saying, hey, this was my experience. This is what I thought. And here's how that can benefit someone else, because I guarantee there's somebody out there listening who could benefit from that conversation.
If our females are barely willing to talk about it, if you can only imagine the impact of having a male guest who has walked through this journey on his own, mm-hmm. I can only imagine what that would mean to the many, many other male athletes out there who find themselves in this same situation.
And I'm sure there is probably a portion of them who think pregnancy happens to the woman. I can't speak on this, but at the same time, I would love to encourage them and say, hey, you're there. You're a part of this. Be willing to have the conversation, step up, and talk about it, because we do need to change that narrative.
This is where it starts, having the hard conversations that no one is willing to have. And so, Charlton, thank you so much for joining us today and us walking through the dynamics of what it looks like to be a pregnant or parenting athlete at a university.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for letting me in my non-athletic ability be able to speak into this topic. And so maybe next time when I'm on, and listeners, if you're going, oh gosh, hopefully there's not a next time. We'll see. But maybe next time when I'm on, that we can just have a conversation that might be a little bit a little more knowledgeable for me.
For sure. Well, thank you so much. And for all of our listeners, we'd love to have you back for our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye-bye. Unplanned and Untold drops new episodes every other Wednesday. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star review if you love this episode. I'm Kaitlyn Willing, and this is Unplanned and Untold.